The morning sun rose over Haven's Gate like a blood orange in the sky, and Claire Winters knew this would be the day that decided everything. She had been awake since before dawn, listening to the other girls crying in their bunks, whispering prayers to gods that had long abandoned this place. The colony world had once been a beacon of hope for humanity, a fresh start among the stars. But that was 300 years ago. Now it was something else entirely, something dark and broken that fed on the lives of young women like her. Claire sat on the edge of her thin mattress and looked around the dormitory hall. 17 other girls were preparing themselves, washing their faces in cold water from the communal basin, braiding their hair with trembling fingers, trying to make themselves presentable for what came next. The harvest day. That was what the syndicate called it, as if they were wheat to be gathered and bundled and sold to the highest bidder. Claire supposed in their eyes that was exactly what they were. She was 19 years old, older than most of the girls who stood on the auction block. A childhood fever had delayed her harvest by a year, and during that extra time she had watched dozens of girls disappear through the auction house doors. Some went to wealthy families as house servants, others went to factories where they worked until their bodies gave out. The pretty ones, the ones with soft hands and bright smiles, they went somewhere else, somewhere the overseers never spoke about but everyone understood. Claire was not pretty. She had brown hair that never quite laid flat, tired eyes that had seen too much, and hands covered in calluses from years of forced labor in the training yards. The syndicate believed in preparing their merchandise properly, so the girls spent their childhoods learning to cook, to clean, to sew, to follow orders without question. Claire had learned all of those things, but she had also learned something else, something dangerous. She had learned to hope. The guards came at exactly 8 in the morning, their boots echoing on the concrete floor like hammer strikes. They wore black uniforms with the syndicate symbol on their shoulders, a crowned fist holding chains. Claire had learned to hate that symbol more than anything else in the world. The lead guard was a woman named Patricia Cross, sister to Vernon Cross, who ran the central auction house. Patricia was tall and thin with a face like carved ice, and she took pleasure in making the girls feel small. "Line up," Patricia barked, and the girls scrambled into formation. 18 frightened souls standing at attention in their identical gray dresses. Claire took her place at the end of the line. She was always last, always forgotten until the very end. They marched through the streets of the city in single file, their hands bound with plastic ties that cut into the skin. People on the sidewalks barely glanced at them. This was normal, just another harvest day, just another group of girls being led to market like livestock. Claire kept her eyes forward and tried not to think about what came next. She tried to remember the stories her mother had told her before the syndicate took her away. Stories about Earth and freedom in a time when people were not bought and sold like property. Those stories felt like fairy tales now, beautiful lies to comfort children in the dark. The auction house loomed ahead, a massive building of gray stone with narrow windows that looked like eyes. Vernon Cross had spared no expense in making it impressive, a temple to commerce and cruelty. The girls were led through a side entrance, down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and fear, and into a holding area behind the main stage. Through the curtain, Claire could hear the crowd gathering, the wealthy buyers taking their seats, laughing and chatting as if this were a social event. One by one, the girls were called forward. Claire listened to the auctioneer's voice droning through the speakers, listing specifications like they were machines instead of human beings. Height, weight, skills, medical history, temperament. Each girl brought a different price. The first one, a blonde girl named Katie with dimples and blue eyes, went for 300 credits. The next few went for less. By the time they reached the 10th girl, the crowd was getting bored, distracted by their phones and their drinks. Claire waited. She always waited. Being last meant watching everyone else disappear first, meant being alone with the growing certainty that maybe this time there would be no buyer at all. She did not know if that would be better or worse. The girls who did not sell went to the mines in the northern wasteland, and no one ever came back from the mines. Finally, Patricia grabbed Claire's arm and shoved her toward the curtain. "You're up, Winters. Try not to embarrass us completely." Claire walked onto the stage on legs that felt like water. The lights were bright and hot, making her squint. The crowd was a blur of faces. Wealthy men and women in expensive clothes holding paddles numbered for bidding. The auctioneer, a fat man with too many rings on his fingers, barely looked at her as he began his speech. Item 18, Claire Winters, age 19. General labor training, basic education, medical history shows childhood fever but full recovery. We'll start the bidding at 10 credits. Silence. Claire stood there under the lights and felt like she was disappearing, becoming invisible, becoming nothing. The auctioneer's smile was getting tighter. Come now, ladies and gentlemen, surely someone needs basic labor. 5 credits, then. Do I hear 5? A paddle rose lazily in the middle of the room. 5, someone called out. 10, another voice said, sounding bored. 15, then nothing. The auctioneer waited, his face starting to flush red. Going once for 15 credits to Sector 9 Industrial. Claire knew what that meant. The factories, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, sleeping in bunks stacked 4 high, breathing air thick with chemical fumes until your lungs gave out. She felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her face blank. They had trained her for that too. Going twice. The crowd had already moved on. People were checking their phones, heading to the refreshment tables, chatting about dinner plans. To them, Claire was already gone, already sold, already forgotten. She closed her eyes and waited for the hammer to fall. Sold to... Wait. The auctioneer's voice changed, surprise cutting through his professional drone. We have a late bid. 200 credits. Private sale request from the back of the hall. The crowd went silent. 200 credits was more than the last 10 girls combined. Claire opened her eyes and tried to see who had spoken, but the lights were too bright. She could only make out a figure standing in the shadows near the rear exit. Tall and still. Name yourself, the auctioneer demanded, and there was uncertainty in his voice now, maybe even fear. The figure stepped forward into the light, and Claire saw a man in a long coat that had seen better days, weathered and patched at the elbows. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and he walked with a slight limp, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet. When he spoke, his voice was rough like gravel, but there was something solid underneath it, something that reminded Claire of bedrock. Gabriel Stone, the man said, and I am not buying. I am offering adoption papers. Legal transfer of family name under Section 47 of the old colonial charter. The room exploded into chaos. The guards moved forward immediately, hands dropping to the weapons at their belts, but Vernon Cross himself stepped out from behind the auctioneer's podium and held up one fat hand. The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, tense and dangerous like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Vernon's face was red and his eyes were small and mean as he stared at the man who called himself Gabriel Stone. That law is obsolete, Vernon said, and his voice carried across the auction hall with practiced authority. We do not recognize colonial charter provisions that predate the syndicate governance. Your bid is invalid. Gabriel reached into his coat with slow, deliberate movements, and every guard in the room tensed, but what he pulled out was not a weapon. It was a data tablet, old and scratched but still functional. He held it up so the overhead screens could pick up the display, and suddenly the wall monitors were showing lines of legal text, highlighted sections, dated stamps from the original colonial government. Colonial charter supersedes all local ordinances, Gabriel said, and his voice was still quiet, but it cut through the muttering crowd like a blade. Article 9, subsection 2, ratified by the Founding Council and encoded into the planetary database with immutable encryption. Would you like me to read it aloud? Or should we contact the planetary governor and ask him to explain why the syndicate is attempting to violate constitutional law? Claire watched Vernon's face cycle through several shades of purple. She did not understand all the legal language, but she understood the basic truth underneath it. This stranger had found a loophole, a crack in the syndicate's armor, and he was driving a wedge into it right here in front of everyone. Vernon was trapped. If he pushed back too hard, if he made this a public fight, he risked drawing attention to other parts of the old charter, other laws that the syndicate had been quietly ignoring for decades. Better to lose one worthless girl than to risk the entire system. Fine. Vernon spat the word like it tasted bad. Take her. But she becomes your legal responsibility. Any crimes, any debts, any problems at all, they fall on your head. The syndicate accepts no liability. Gabriel nodded once, sharp and final. He crossed the auction floor in steady strides, favoring his left leg slightly, and climbed the steps to the stage. Up close, Claire could see his face properly for the first time. He was maybe 50 years old, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of old pain. Those eyes were gray too, like storm clouds, and deeply sad. But there was something else in them. Something Claire had not seen in a long time. Kindness. He held out his hand to her, palm up, waiting. "You have a choice," Gabriel said, and his voice was gentle now, meant only for her. "Come with me as a free citizen under my family name, or stay here and take your chances with wherever they send you. But you need to choose now, and the choice needs to be yours." Claire stared at his hand. Every instinct she had told her this was a trap. Nothing was free. Nobody helped anyone without wanting something in return. That was the first lesson the syndicate taught, and they taught it well. But as she looked into Gabriel Stone's sad gray eyes, she saw something that made her want to believe in fairy tales again. She saw truth. She took his hand. Gabriel helped her down from the platform, and his grip was steady and warm. He led her through the crowd, and people stepped back to let them pass, uncertain and confused. Patricia moved to block their path, but Vernon waved her aside with visible disgust. They walked out through the main doors and into the afternoon sunlight, and Claire felt the warmth on her face like a blessing. The sky was purple with streaks of orange where the twin suns were starting their slow descent, and she realized she had not been outside during daylight in almost 6 months. A cargo hauler sat at the curb, old and battered and covered in dents that told stories of hard use. Gabriel opened the passenger door and waited while Claire climbed in. The interior smelled like motor oil and worn leather, and the seat had been patched with duct tape in 3 places. Gabriel got in behind the wheel and started the engine, which coughed twice before catching. Then they were moving, pulling away from the auction house, leaving it behind. They drove in silence through the city streets. Claire watched the buildings pass by, the shops and apartments and the people going about their lives as if nothing had happened. Maybe for them nothing had. Maybe girls getting sold was so normal that it did not register anymore. Gabriel drove carefully, obeying the speed limit, stopping at every red light. Claire kept waiting for him to speak, to explain, to demand something, but he just drove. After 20 minutes, the buildings started to thin out, and they entered the outskirts where the city gave way to farmland. The road turned from pavement to packed dirt, and dust rose behind them in a red cloud. Finally, Gabriel pulled off onto a narrow drive that led to a small farmhouse sitting alone on a few acres of scrubland. It was modest but well-maintained, with solar panels on the roof and a vegetable garden beside the house protected by mesh fencing. Gabriel shut off the engine and sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Then he spoke. "My daughter would have been your age. Her name was Lily. 3 years ago she got sick with the fever, the same one you had, but she did not make it. That broke my wife, a woman named Helen. She lasted 6 months after we buried Lily, and then the grief took her too. I have been alone since then." Claire did not know what to say. "I am sorry," seemed too small for what he was describing. "Do not be sorry," Gabriel said, turning to look at her. "Be free, that is all I want." That is all they would have wanted. "I am not looking for a replacement daughter. I am not looking for anything except to do one good thing before I die. So here is how this works. This is your home now if you want it. No obligations, no debts, no expectations. You can leave any time you choose. You can stay as long as you like. While you are here, you are family. You are Claire Stone, do you understand?" Claire felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest, something warm and fragile. "I understand." "Good." Gabriel opened his door. "Let me show you around." The house was small but clean, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that opened onto a living area. Everything was old but cared for, and there were photographs on the mantel showing a smiling woman with kind eyes and a little girl with braids tied with yellow ribbons. Gabriel showed Claire to the smaller bedroom, which had a real bed with a quilt and a window that looked out over the garden. "This was Lily's room," he said. "I kept it the same. I hope that does not bother you." Claire touched the quilt and felt the careful stitching. "It does not bother me." That night, Gabriel made dinner, which was simple but more food than Claire had seen in months. Real vegetables from the garden, bread that was only a day old, even a small piece of meat that he cooked on an old electric grill. They ate at a wooden table in the kitchen, and Gabriel asked her questions about what she liked to do, what she wanted to learn, what her dreams had been before the syndicate took them away. No one had ever asked Claire about her dreams before. When she finally went to bed in Lily's room, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. For the first time in her life, she was not surrounded by dozens of other girls, not listening to guards walking the hallways, not counting the hours until morning labor call. She was alone in a quiet room with a locked door that she could open from the inside anytime she wanted. The concept was so strange it felt almost frightening. But slowly, as exhaustion finally pulled her down toward sleep, Claire felt that fragile warmth in her chest grow a little stronger. It felt like hope. It felt like home. It felt like maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could be real after all. The first week was the hardest because Claire did not know how to be free. She woke every morning before dawn with her heart pounding, expecting the harsh clang of the wake-up bell and the shouted orders from the guards. Instead, she found silence, and in that silence her mind filled with panic. She would lie there in the dark, wondering if she had overslept, if she was about to be punished, if this whole thing was some elaborate test that she was failing. On the third morning, Gabriel knocked gently on her door and asked if she wanted breakfast. Claire had been awake for 2 hours by then, sitting on the edge of the bed and trying to remember how to breathe normally. She came out to find Gabriel in the kitchen making eggs and toast, and the simple normalcy of it made her want to cry. "You do not have to get up this early," Gabriel said without turning around. He was good at that, at talking to her without making it feel like an interrogation. "You can sleep as long as you want. You can stay in bed all day if that helps. There are no schedules here except the ones we choose." But sleep was difficult. Claire's body had been trained for 19 years to wake at 5, to work until exhaustion, to collapse into dreamless unconsciousness, and then wake again. Undoing that programming was like trying to unlearn how to breathe. She would jolt awake in the middle of the night, heart hammering, convinced she heard boots in the hallway. Then she would remember where she was, and the relief would wash over her so intensely it left her shaking. Gabriel never pushed. He simply existed around her like a steady presence, doing his daily work and leaving space for her to figure things out. He showed her the rhythms of the farm, how to check the solar panels for dust and clean them with a soft brush, how to test the soil in the garden and know when to water and when to wait. He taught her how to coax the old well pump into working, how to repair the mesh fence when the desert rats chewed through it, how to collect eggs from the 3 chickens that lived in a coop behind the house. The work was hard but honest. Claire's hands had calluses already, but these were different kinds of calluses earned through choice rather than force. At the end of each day, Gabriel would look at what they had accomplished and say, "Good work today," in that quiet gravel voice, and he meant it. There was no inspection, no criticism, no punishment for being too slow or making mistakes. Just acknowledgement that she had tried, and that was enough. Slowly, Claire began to notice small things about Gabriel that told her who he really was. The way he always made extra food and left it in a covered dish by the front gate for travelers who might pass through. The careful way he maintained Lily's photographs, dusting them every few days and straightening them when they tilted. The old military jacket hanging in the closet with ribbons and medals that he never wore but never threw away. The way he sometimes stood at the window at night staring up at the stars with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of worlds. One evening they sat together on the porch watching the twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The desert stretched out before them, vast and empty and beautiful in its own harsh way. Claire had been gathering courage all day for the question she needed to ask. "Why did you really save me?" The words came out quieter than she intended. Gabriel was silent for a long time, and Claire started to worry she had overstepped. But then he spoke. "When Lily died, I blamed myself. I was her father. I was supposed to protect her, keep her safe, but I could not save her from a fever. Could not save Helen from grief. I felt powerless in a way I had never felt, even during the war." "What war?" Claire asked. "The one that ended before you were born, when the colonial government still existed and tried to hold the syndicate in check. I was a soldier then. I did things I am not proud of, and I failed to do things I should have done. When it was over, I brought my family out here and tried to build something clean. Something good." He paused. "But clean things do not stay clean in a dirty world. The syndicate grew stronger. The auctions started, and I told myself it was not my problem anymore. I had done my part. I deserved peace." Claire waited, sensing there was more. "Then I heard about a harvest day coming up. I was in town buying supplies, and I saw them marching girls through the street. You were at the back of the line. You looked so tired, so defeated, and I saw Lily in you, not because you looked like her, but because you were somebody's daughter and nobody was fighting for you. I realized that maybe I could not save my family, but I could save someone else's daughter. So I went to the archives and I dug through 300 years of legal code until I found that adoption clause. And then I came to the auction. I did not have a family, Claire said quietly. You do now. Those 3 words broke something open inside her. Claire felt tears starting to fall, hot and unexpected and unstoppable. She tried to hold them back because crying was weakness and the syndicate had taught her that weakness was punished. But Gabriel did not punish weakness. He just sat beside her, solid and steady until the storm passed. When she finally stopped shaking, he handed her a handkerchief without saying anything, and they watched the rest of the sunset in comfortable silence. The next day, Claire started helping with the garden more seriously. Gabriel showed her how to plant seeds in rows, how to thin seedlings so the strong ones had room to grow, how to identify weeds and pull them without disturbing the crops. The work was meditative, and Claire found herself thinking about growth, about how things could change if given the right conditions. She had been a weed in the syndicate's eyes, something to be pulled and discarded, but here she was being treated like a seedling, given space and water and sunlight to become whatever she was meant to be. One afternoon, a truck pulled up the drive, and Claire tensed automatically, old fears rising. But Gabriel walked out to meet it calmly, and the woman who climbed out was around Gabriel's age with sun-weathered skin and a wide smile. Her name was Margaret Hunt, and she owned the neighboring farm 3 miles down the road. Heard you adopted a daughter? Margaret said, looking at Claire with open curiosity but no judgment. Wanted to bring a welcome gift. She handed Gabriel a basket with fresh bread and a jar of preserved fruit. Gabriel introduced Claire and Margaret shook her hand firmly. Good for you, girl. And good for you, Gabriel. You have been alone too long. After Margaret left, Gabriel explained that she was part of a loose network of farmers and small business owners who helped each other out, people who tried to live outside the syndicate's control as much as possible. It was not organized resistance, just ordinary people being decent to each other, but it mattered. That night as Claire lay in bed, she thought about Margaret's words. Good for you, girl. As if choosing freedom was an accomplishment worth celebrating. As if Claire had done something brave instead of just accepting a gift. But maybe that was the point. Maybe choosing to accept help. Choosing to believe in kindness. Choosing to hope. Maybe that was the bravest thing of all in a world that tried to beat those impulses out of you. She fell asleep easier that night, and when she woke before dawn, she did not panic. She just lay there listening to the quiet house and feeling grateful for another day of learning how to live. Word spread through the colony like water finding cracks in stone, slow but inevitable. Gabriel Stone had defied the syndicate. Gabriel Stone had used old laws to steal property from an auction. Gabriel Stone had made Vernon Cross look like a fool in front of the wealthiest buyers on Haven's Gate. The story changed with each telling, getting bigger and stranger, but the core truth remained. One man had stood up and won. In his office at the auction house, Vernon Cross sat behind his massive desk and seethed. The humiliation burned like acid in his stomach. He had been running auctions for 15 years and never once had anyone challenged him. The system worked because everyone accepted it as inevitable, as natural as gravity. Now this farmer, this nobody, had shown that the system had cracks. That made Vernon dangerous because if people started looking for cracks, they might find others. He made calls. He pulled files. He wanted to know everything about Gabriel Stone, every detail that might give him leverage. What he found was interesting. 20 years ago, Gabriel had been Lieutenant Gabriel Stone of the Colonial Defense Force, back when such a thing still existed. He had been decorated twice for valor, known for tactical brilliance and an unwavering moral code that made him both respected and difficult to command. His record was exemplary until the final year of the war, when the provisional government started making deals with the emerging syndicate. The Defense Force was ordered to help enforce labor contracts, which was a polite way of saying they were ordered to hunt down people who ran from the auction houses and drag them back. Gabriel had refused. He had written a formal letter of protest, stating that the Defense Force was meant to protect citizens, not enslave them. When his protest was ignored, he resigned his commission and disappeared into the countryside with his wife and infant daughter. The government had bigger problems than one stubborn soldier, so they let him go. Vernon read all of this and smiled. He could work with this, a military deserter who abandoned his post, a man who had defied lawful orders. Never mind that those orders were 20 years old and the government that gave them no longer existed. In the court of public opinion, details did not matter. Perception mattered. He began making other calls, spreading whispers, planting seeds. Gabriel Stone was not a hero. He was a criminal, a man who could not be trusted. Who knew what his real intentions were with that girl? Vernon was careful to never say anything directly actionable, but he made sure the questions were out there, floating in the air like poison. Meanwhile, Claire was discovering the world beyond the farm. Gabriel had given her a small amount of money, earned from selling vegetables at the local market, and told her she could spend it however she wanted. The concept of having money that belonged to her, that she could use for her own choices, was so foreign it took her 3 days to work up the courage to go into town. The town was called Mercy, which was either deeply ironic or wishful thinking, depending on how you looked at it. It had one main street with a dozen shops, a bar, a medical clinic, and a mechanic's garage that seemed to be the social hub. Claire walked down the street feeling exposed and vulnerable, convinced everyone was staring at her, judging her, knowing she was the auction girl that Gabriel had taken in, but most people barely glanced at her. They were busy with their own lives, their own problems. Claire bought bread from the bakery, and the woman behind the counter smiled and asked if she was Gabriel's girl. When Claire nodded uncertainly, the woman added an extra roll to the bag without charging for it. "Tell Gabriel that Margaret says hello." The mechanic's garage sat at the end of the street, and Claire found herself drawn to it by the sound of music playing and someone singing badly off-key. She peered through the open bay door and saw a young woman about her age lying under a truck, only her legs visible, wearing grease-stained coveralls. The woman rolled out on a creeper, saw Claire, and grinned. "You need something fixed, or are you just sightseeing?" she asked. "Just looking," Claire said. The woman stood and wiped her hands on a rag that was already too dirty to help. She was shorter than Claire, with curly black hair pulled into a messy ponytail, and dark eyes that sparkled with mischief. "You are the auction girl everyone is talking about. The one Gabriel adopted?" Claire felt her stomach drop. "I guess so." "Good for you," the woman said, sticking out her hand. "I am Sophie Grant. I own this dump." "Well, my dad owns it, but he is too drunk most days to remember that, so really I own it." Claire shook her hand carefully. "Claire? I know. Small town. Everyone knows everything." Sophie gestured around the garage. "You know anything about engines?" "No." "Well, you are about to learn. Grab that wrench." For the next 2 hours, Sophie taught Claire the basics of combustion engines, showing her how to change oil, check belts, identify worn parts. Sophie talked constantly, asking questions and answering them herself when Claire did not respond fast enough, filling the air with chatter that should have been annoying, but somehow was not. It felt like Sophie was trying to normalize Claire's presence, to make her just another person instead of the auction girl, the charity case, the symbol of Gabriel's defiance. When they finally took a break, sitting on upturned crates and drinking cold water from a cooler, Sophie asked the question Claire had been waiting for. "So what is it like living with Gabriel Stone?" "Quiet," Claire said. "He is kind. Yeah, he is one of the good ones. Lost his family a few years back. Whole town felt that. We tried to help, but he wanted to be alone with his grief." Sophie took a long drink. "But I guess he is done being alone now." "Good, people are not meant to be alone." Claire thought about that. She had been surrounded by people her entire life. Dozens of girls packed into dormitories, and she had never felt more alone. Now she lived with one quiet man in a house in the middle of nowhere, and she felt less alone than she ever had. Loneliness was not about numbers. It was about connection. Over the following weeks, Claire fell into a routine. She worked the farm with Gabriel, learning more each day. She visited Sophie at the garage and learned about machines. She walked through town and slowly, painfully slowly, began to feel like maybe she belonged there. People started to recognize her, to nod hello, to ask how Gabriel was doing. She was becoming part of the community, but darkness was gathering. Vernon's whispers were finding receptive ears among the syndicate loyalists, people whose wealth and status depended on the auction system continuing. They began to see Gabriel as a threat, and Claire as the symbol of that threat. Something needed to be done. One night Claire woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and heard voices outside. Angry voices. Gabriel was already moving through the house, and when Claire came out of her room, she saw him looking through the window with an expression she had never seen before. Cold, controlled, dangerous. Outside, 3 men stood in the yard, their faces covered with cloth masks. They had thrown rocks through the kitchen window, and now they were shouting. Send the girl out, Stone. She does not belong to you. Send her back where she came from. Gabriel opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. He was not armed, but something about the way he moved made the men step back. Leave, Gabriel said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Leave now and I will forget this happened. You think you are some kind of hero? One of the men shouted. You are just a washed-up soldier who could not protect his own family. What makes you think you can protect her? The words hit Gabriel like physical blows. Claire could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, but he did not rise to the bait. This is your last warning. The men hesitated, caught between their anger and the sudden certainty that Gabriel Stone might be more dangerous than they had anticipated. Finally, they backed away, still shouting threats, and climbed into their truck. They sped off down the road, leaving tire marks in the dirt. Gabriel stood on the porch for a long time after they were gone. Claire came out and stood beside him, and neither of them said anything. They both knew this was just the beginning. Vernon Cross was not done. The syndicate was not done. The fight was coming whether they wanted it or not. Autumn came to Haven's Gate with cold winds that stripped the last leaves from the trees and turned the sky a deeper shade of purple. Claire had been living with Gabriel for 3 months now, and in that time she had learned what it meant to have a home. She knew which floorboards creaked, how to coax the temperamental coffee maker into working, where Gabriel kept the good blankets for cold nights. These small domestic details felt like treasures, proof that she belonged somewhere. But the peace was fragile. More incidents followed that first night. Someone poisoned the garden, killing half the vegetables. The fence was cut in 3 places, letting the chickens escape. Threatening messages appeared on the gate, crude words painted in red. Gabriel reported everything to the local authorities, but the town had no real police force anymore. The syndicate controlled security, and the syndicate was not interested in helping Gabriel Stone. Sophie told Claire that people in town were taking sides. Some admired Gabriel for standing up to the auctions. Others thought he was causing trouble, disturbing a system that, while cruel, at least provided stability. Families were arguing over dinner tables. Friendships were fracturing. The whole colony felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Vernon Cross made his move on a cold evening when the twin suns were setting early, and long shadows stretched across the land. Claire was helping Gabriel repair the fence when she heard the sound of engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. They both looked up to see a convoy of black trucks rolling up the drive, kicking up dust and gravel. Gabriel's face went hard. Get inside, he said quietly. No, Claire said. She was surprised by her own voice, by the firmness in it. Whatever happens, we face it together. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Pride maybe, or recognition. He nodded once, and they stood together at the gate as the convoy pulled up. Vernon Cross climbed out of the lead vehicle, flanked by 8 hired enforcers in body armor carrying shock batons and restraint equipment. Vernon had dressed for the occasion in an expensive suit, and his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Gabriel, he said pleasantly, like they were old friends meeting for coffee. I'm afraid we have a problem. State your business. Vernon, Gabriel said, his old military bearing returning, shoulders back and voice level. Vernon pulled a data tablet from his jacket and made a show of reading from it. I have here a warrant issued by the Syndicate Council for the investigation of illegal harboring of syndicate property. We are authorized to take the girl into protective custody pending a full review of your adoption claim. She is not property. She is my daughter. The adoption was legal under colonial charter. Yes, about that charter. Vernon's smile widened. We have decided to challenge its validity in court. The colonial government that wrote it no longer exists. Therefore, its authority is questionable. Until the courts rule definitively, we are exercising caution and returning the girl to syndicate oversight. Claire felt ice in her stomach. This was what she had been afraid of from the beginning, that it was all temporary. That freedom was just a dream she would wake up from. You will not take her, Gabriel said, and there was something in his voice that made the enforcers shift uneasily. Vernon's smile faded. Do not be stupid, Gabriel. You are one old man. We are the syndicate. We are the law on this planet. Stand aside or we will move you aside. Then you will have to move me. Gabriel stepped forward, positioning himself between Vernon and the house, between the syndicate and Claire. He was not armed. He was outnumbered. He was 50 years old with a bad leg and gray in his hair. but he stood there like he was a wall that could not be broken. Vernon's face twisted with anger. You really think you are some kind of hero, do not you? You could not save your daughter. You could not save your wife. What makes you think you can save this one? Claire saw Gabriel flinch, saw the words hit home. She started to move forward, to say something, to defend him. But then she heard something else. Engines. Lots of engines. Vehicles were pouring in from every access road. Trucks and haulers and old cars, dozens of them. They formed a semicircle around the syndicate convoy, blocking them in. Farmers climbed out. Mechanics, shopkeepers, teachers, people Claire recognized from town and people she had never seen before. Margaret Hunt was there, standing tall with a rifle cradled in her arms. Sophie drove up in her tow truck, music blaring, and jumped out with a tire iron in her hand. Problem, Gabriel? Sophie called out cheerfully. Gabriel stood there looking at the crowd, and Claire saw his jaw tighten with emotion. He had thought he was alone. He had been prepared to stand alone. But he was not alone. You have a problem with Gabriel Stone, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the yard. You have a problem with all of us. Vernon looked at the crowd, and Claire could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He had 8 enforcers. There were at least 50 people in that semicircle, and more arriving every minute. Some were armed. All were angry. This was not a fight he could win. Not here, not today. This is not over, Vernon said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. He pointed at Gabriel. This is far from over. You have made an enemy of the syndicate, Stone. That is not a smart move. I made that enemy 20 years ago. Gabriel said calmly. Nothing has changed except now I am done pretending I can ignore it. Vernon climbed back into his vehicle and the convoy pulled out. Forced to navigate carefully through the crowd that parted just enough to let them through, but not enough to make it easy. When they were gone, silence fell over the yard. Then Margaret started clapping. Others joined in. Soon the whole crowd was applauding. And Claire realized they were applauding Gabriel, applauding her, applauding the idea that maybe, just maybe, the syndicate was not invincible after all. People came up to shake Gabriel's hand, to introduce themselves to Claire, to offer help and support. The impromptu gathering turned into something like a party, with people sharing food from their trucks and telling stories about their own run-ins with the syndicate. Claire found herself surrounded by strangers who treated her like she mattered, like she was worth defending. Sophie pulled Claire aside and grinned. You know what you are now, right? You are a symbol. You are proof that someone can say no to the auctions and survive. That is dangerous. I did not ask to be a symbol, Claire said. Symbols never do. Sophie's grin faded into something more serious. But you are one whether you want to be or not. People are watching you, hoping you make it, so you better make it. As the crowd began to disperse, promising to keep watch and help however they could, Gabriel stood with Claire on the porch and watched them go. His face was tired, but there was something else there too. Hope maybe. Purpose. I am sorry, Claire said quietly. I brought this on you. No, Gabriel said firmly. I brought this on myself when I walked into that auction house. And I would do it again. Every time. He looked at her. You are not a burden, Claire. You are my daughter. That means I fight for you. That is what fathers do. Claire felt tears starting, but she did not try to hide them. What do we do now? Gabriel looked out at the empty road where the syndicate convoy had disappeared. Now we get ready. Because Vernon was right about one thing. This is not over. It is just beginning. That night, Claire lay awake listening to Gabriel moving through the house, checking locks and windows, making preparations. She knew they had won a battle today, but the war was still ahead. The syndicate was not going to just let this go. They could not afford to. If one girl could escape, others might try. If one man could defy them, others might follow. The entire system was built on fear and acceptance, and Gabriel had cracked both. Claire understood now that freedom was not something given. It was something fought for every single day. And tomorrow the fight would continue. The standoff at Gabriel's farm changed everything. What had been one man's quiet act of defiance became something larger, something that spread through the colony like wildfire, jumping from tree to tree. People who had accepted the auctions as inevitable started asking questions. Why did we let this happen? When did we decide that daughters were property? How did we become the kind of people who buy and sell children? Gabriel's mailbox filled with letters. Some were hateful, calling him a troublemaker and worse. But others were different. They came from parents who had lost daughters to the auctions, from women who had survived the auctions themselves, from people who had been waiting for someone, anyone, to stand up first. One letter came from a farmer named Peter Hughes who had hidden his daughter for 2 years, moving her from barn to barn across the countryside to keep her away from harvest day. Another came from a teacher named Linda Fox who had been fired for speaking out against the auction system and now taught children in secret. Claire read these letters with growing understanding. They were not alone. There were others out there, scattered and frightened and isolated, but they existed. They just needed to be connected, organized, given hope that resistance was possible. "We cannot just hide anymore," Claire said to Gabriel one evening as they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by letters. "They will keep coming. They will find ways to take me back. But if we fight, if we organize, we could actually change things." Gabriel looked at her with tired eyes. "I am too old for revolutions, Claire. I already fought one war and lost. You are not old. You are experienced. You know things that we need to know. How to plan, how to organize, how to fight smart instead of just fighting hard." She spread the letters across the table. "These people are asking for help. They are asking for leadership. You can give them that. And what about you?" Gabriel asked. "What do you want?" Claire thought about the auction block, about the feeling of standing under those lights while people decided her worth in credits. She thought about the 17 other girls who had been sold that day, and all the girls before them, and all the girls who would come after if nothing changed. "I want every daughter on this planet to know they are not property," Claire said. "I want the auctions to end. I want the syndicate to fall, and I am willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen." Gabriel studied her face for a long moment, and Claire wondered what he saw. Not the frightened girl from 3 months ago. Someone different. Someone harder. Someone who had learned what it meant to be free and would burn the world down before going back. "All right," Gabriel said finally. "We do this, but we do it smart. We build a network. We stay small and quiet until we are strong enough to make noise, and we accept that this might take years." "I have years," Claire said. They started that night. Gabriel sent careful responses to the letters, using codes and meeting places, never putting too much information in one message. Within a week, they had their first gathering. 8 people sitting in Margaret's barn under the light of electric lanterns. There was Peter Hughes, the farmer, Linda Fox, the teacher, Sophie from the garage, Margaret herself, and 3 others. A doctor named Chris Murphy who treated auction survivors in secret, a mechanic named Luis Gomez who had lost 2 sisters to the system, and a former syndicate enforcer named Kate Rivers, who had quit in disgust and was looking for redemption. Gabriel stood before them and spoke in his quiet gravel voice about tactics and strategy, how to build cells that operated independently, so if one was discovered, the others would survive, how to stockpile supplies without drawing attention, how to identify allies and avoid infiltrators. He taught them the lessons he had learned 20 years ago in a different war, and they listened like students in a classroom. But it was Claire who became the voice of the resistance. She told her story, simple and direct, about what it felt like to stand on that auction block. She talked about the other girls, about the ones who went to the factories and the mines and the private buyers who never reported what happened behind closed doors. She made the abstract cruelty real and personal, and people listened. Word spread carefully, person to person, whispered in trusted ears. The network grew. 10 people, 20, 50. They called themselves the Lighthouse Collective because that was what they wanted to be. A light in the darkness. A signal to anyone drowning that there was hope, that there was land, that resistance was possible. They started small, safe houses for girls who ran from the auctions, underground education programs, a secret communication system using old radio frequencies that the syndicate did not monitor. They forged documents, created false identities, moved people who needed to disappear. It was dangerous work, and they all knew it, but they also knew it mattered. The syndicate noticed. How could they not? The number of successful runaways increased. Families started refusing to send daughters to Harvest Day, claiming medical exemptions or simply vanishing into the countryside. Vernon Cross put pressure on local authorities, demanded investigations, offered rewards for information. But the collective was careful. They did not make mistakes. Then winter came, and with it a new threat. The syndicate assigned a special investigator to the case, a woman named Victoria Hayes, who had a reputation for ruthless efficiency. She was known for breaking resistance movements on other colonies, for finding the cracks in any organization, and exploiting them until the whole thing collapsed. She arrived on Haven's Gate with a team of specialists and unlimited authority. Victoria did not make dramatic moves. She was too smart for that. Instead, she began a careful, methodical campaign. She planted informants in places the collective might recruit. She analyzed patterns, looking for connections between seemingly unrelated events. She offered immunity deals to anyone who would betray the network. And she waited. The first crack came on a cold morning when a safe house was raided. 3 families were arrested, including 2 girls who had been scheduled for auction. The collective moved quickly, evacuating other safe houses, changing communication protocols, but the damage was done. Fear crept in. If one safe house was compromised, how many others were known? Who had talked? Could anyone be trusted? Gabriel called an emergency meeting of the core leadership. They gathered in a different location this time, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The mood was tense. "We have a leak," Sophie said, stating the obvious. "Someone is feeding them information. Then we find them and we cut them out," Kate said. Her enforcer training made her default to direct action. "It is not that simple," Gabriel said. "If we start accusing people without proof, we will tear ourselves apart faster than the syndicate ever could. We need to be smart." They debated for hours, trying to figure out how Victoria had found the safe house, who might have talked, what they could do to protect the others. But there were no easy answers. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Claire sat quietly through most of the meeting, listening and thinking. She watched the way people interacted, the way they looked at each other, the small tells that revealed stress and fear. She had spent 19 years learning to read people in the dormitories, learning to spot threats before they materialized. Those skills served her now. She noticed that Luis, the mechanic who had lost his sisters, seemed nervous. He kept checking his phone, kept glancing at the door. When someone asked him a direct question, he answered too quickly, too defensively. Small things, maybe nothing, but maybe not nothing. After the meeting ended, Claire pulled Gabriel aside and shared her observations. Gabriel listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly. "Keep watching him," Gabriel said, "but do not confront him, not yet. We need to be sure." Over the next week, they watched Luis carefully. They fed him false information and waited to see if it reached the syndicate. They tested him with small questions and noted his responses. And slowly, painfully, the truth became clear. Luis was compromised, but not in the way they expected. The truth came in the middle of the night, delivered by someone they never expected. Claire was sleeping when she heard pebbles hitting her window, the old signal that meant someone needed help urgently. She looked out to see a young man standing in the yard. Barely more than a boy, really, maybe 17 years old. She recognized him as Ben Carter, son of Martin Carter, who ran a small farm on the eastern edge of the territory, and had joined the collective 2 months ago. Claire woke Gabriel, and they met Ben at the door. The boy was shaking, his face streaked with tears, and his voice broke as he tried to explain. "It is my father," Ben said. "He is the one. He has been reporting to Victoria Hayes. I found the messages on his tablet tonight, everything. Meeting locations, names, safe house addresses, everything." Gabriel's face went hard, but his voice stayed calm. "Where is your father now?" "At home. He does not know I found out. He does not know I am here." Ben looked up at them with desperate eyes. "Please, he is not a bad man. They are threatening him, threatening our family, threatening to take my sister Lucy to the next auction if he does not cooperate." He thought he had no choice. Claire felt her heart twist. Lucy Carter was 15. Still 3 years away from Harvest Day. But the syndicate did not care about their own rules when it suited them. She had met Lucy once, a quiet girl with her mother's gentle smile, and the thought of her on the auction block made Claire's blood boil. "I understand," Gabriel said quietly, and Claire could hear that he meant it. He understood desperation. He understood what it meant to make terrible choices to protect the people you loved. "But now your father has to make this right. Can you bring him here?" Ben nodded and disappeared into the darkness. 20 minutes later, he returned with Martin Carter, a thin man with stooped shoulders and the look of someone who had not slept in weeks. Martin saw Gabriel and Claire and seemed to collapse in on himself. "I am sorry," Martin said, and the words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. "I am so sorry. They came to me 8 weeks ago. Victoria Hayes herself. She showed me pictures of Lucy, said that accidents happen, that girls younger than 18 sometimes end up at auction due to clerical errors, that it would be terrible if that happened to my daughter. So I told them things. Not everything. Just enough to keep them satisfied. Just enough to keep Lucy safe. You told them about the safe house, Gabriel said. It was not a question. Yes. And about the meeting last week, and about the supply drop next Tuesday. Martin looked like he wanted to die. I betrayed everyone. Betrayed the collective. Betrayed you, Gabriel, after everything you have done. I am a coward. Gabriel was silent for a long time. Claire watched his face, trying to read his thoughts. She had seen him angry before, had seen him cold and distant, but this was different. This was sadness. Understanding. The recognition that good people could be broken by fear. You are not a coward, Gabriel said finally. You are a father trying to protect his child. I understand that better than you know. But now you need to help us fix this. Are you willing to do that? Martin nodded frantically. Anything. I will do anything. They spent the rest of the night planning. The solution was risky, but it was the only option they had. Martin would continue feeding information to Victoria Hayes, but now it would be false information. They would use him to set a trap, to lead Victoria and her team into a situation where the collective had the advantage. Meanwhile, the real operation, the one that mattered, would happen elsewhere. The target was the central auction house itself. In 2 weeks, there would be another harvest day, another group of girls scheduled to stand on that platform and be sold like property. The collective was going to stop it. They were going to free those girls and do it in a way that the entire colony would see. They were going to make the syndicate's cruelty impossible to ignore. It was audacious. It was dangerous. People could die, but they were out of time and out of patience. The syndicate needed to understand that the collective was not just a nuisance to be managed. They were a threat to everything the syndicate had built. Gabriel divided the operation into 3 parts. Martin would feed Victoria information about a fake raid on a syndicate warehouse on the northern edge of the city. Victoria would take her team there, expecting to catch collective members in the act. Meanwhile, Sophie would lead a group to disable the auction house security systems, and Gabriel would lead the assault team that would actually breach the building and evacuate the girls. Claire insisted on being part of the assault team. Gabriel argued against it, said it was too dangerous, that she was too important to risk. But Claire stood her ground. Those girls are me, she said. 6 months ago, I was standing where they are standing. If I'm not willing to risk everything to save them, then what are we even doing? Gabriel looked at her and saw the truth. She was not his little girl anymore. She was a soldier in this war, and soldiers did not get to hide when things got dangerous. All right, he said, but you follow orders. You stay with the group, and if things go wrong, you run. Understood? Understood. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Gabriel drilled the assault team on tactics, running them through scenarios until everyone knew their role by heart. Sophie and her technical crew studied the auction house security, finding vulnerabilities and planning their approach. Martin fed carefully crafted lies to Victoria, watching her take the bait, watching her prepare her own trap. The night before the operation, Gabriel sat Claire down at the kitchen table. He looked older than she had ever seen him, worn down by the weight of what they were about to do. When I adopted you, Gabriel said, I told myself I just wanted you to be free, to have the life that Lily never got to have. But somewhere along the way, this became bigger than that. This became about changing the whole system, and I need you to understand that tomorrow we might lose. People we care about might get hurt. You might get hurt. And if that happens, if I lose you the way I lost Lily, I do not know if I can survive it. Claire reached across the table and took his hand. You will not lose me. And even if you do, you will survive, because that is what you do. You survive and you keep fighting. And you make sure that the people who come after us have it better than we did. That is who you are. Gabriel squeezed her hand. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. That night, Claire lay awake in Lily's bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the morning to come. She thought about the girls in the holding cells at the auction house, counting down their last hours of childhood. She thought about all the girls who had come before, the ones who had not been saved, the ones who lived broken lives in factories and mines and worse places. She thought about the future, about a Haven's Gate where daughters were daughters and not property. She thought about Gabriel, sleeping in the next room, a man who had lost everything and still found the strength to fight for strangers. She thought about Sophie and Margaret and Kate and all the others who were risking everything for an idea, for hope. And she thought about herself, about the girl who had stood on the auction block and accepted Gabriel's hand, about how that one choice had led to this moment. Tomorrow she would stand on that platform again. But this time she would not be waiting to be saved. This time she would be the one doing the saving. She fell asleep as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, and she dreamed of freedom. The morning came cold and clear, with frost on the ground and the twin suns rising like judgment over Haven's Gate. Claire dressed in dark, practical clothing that Sophie had provided, clothes that would not catch on things or slow her down if she needed to run. She checked her supplies twice the way Gabriel had taught her. Water, first aid kit, bolt cutters, emergency beacon, everything she might need. Gabriel gathered the assault team at Margaret's farm before dawn. There were 12 of them, all volunteers who understood the risks. Kate was there with her enforcer training, Sophie with her technical skills, Peter and his 2 grown sons. Others Claire had come to know over the months of building the collective. They looked nervous but determined, and Gabriel moved among them, checking gear and offering quiet words of encouragement. At exactly 8 in the morning, Martin sent the signal to Victoria Hayes. The fake raid on the warehouse was beginning. Gabriel waited 10 minutes to make sure Victoria had taken the bait, then gave the order to move. They drove into the city in 3 separate vehicles, approaching the auction house from different directions to avoid drawing attention. The morning streets were quiet, people heading to work or opening shops, no one suspecting that in a few minutes everything would change. Sophie and her team reached the auction house first. They accessed the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the building, ancient infrastructure from when the colony was first settled. Sophie had studied the security systems for weeks, and she moved through the electronic locks like a ghost, disabling cameras and cutting power to the alarm grid. Within 15 minutes, she signaled that the path was clear. Gabriel's team entered through the loading dock and back, moving fast and quiet. They wore masks to hide their faces, not because they planned to hide afterward, but because they did not want the girls they were rescuing to see them as criminals. Kate took point, using her knowledge of syndicate procedures to navigate the corridors. They passed offices and storage rooms, moving deeper into the building. They reached the holding area behind the main stage and found it locked with a heavy security door. Gabriel placed a small explosive charge on the lock mechanism, the kind used for emergency breaching, and they all stepped back. The explosion was loud in the confined space but controlled, and the door swung open. Inside they found 43 girls in holding cells, all wearing the same gray dresses that Claire remembered. Some were crying. Others sat in silent shock. They looked up as the collective members rushed in, and Claire saw her own fear reflected in their faces. Gabriel started cutting locks while Claire moved to the nearest cell and knelt down so she was eye level with the girls inside. There were 5 of them, ranging from maybe 16 to 19 years old, and they stared at her like she was a hallucination. "My name is Claire," she said, keeping her voice steady and calm. "6 months ago I was sitting where you are sitting. I was scheduled to be sold, but someone saved me. And now we are here to save you. We are going to get you out of here. We are going to take you somewhere safe, but you need to trust us and you need to move fast." "Can you do that?" The oldest girl nodded slowly. "You are the one they talk about, the one Gabriel Stone adopted." "Yes, and we are all going to walk out of here together." The locks came off and the girls poured out of the cells. Some were too scared to move and had to be gently guided. Others ran to the collective members and held on like drowning people grabbing life rafts. Gabriel directed traffic, sending groups toward the exit with escorts, making sure no one was left behind. Then alarms started blaring. Somewhere in the building, someone had noticed the breach. Syndicate security would be responding. "Move," Gabriel shouted. "Everyone out now." They ran for the loading dock. 43 girls and 12 collective members, a flood of people pouring through corridors that were never meant to handle that kind of traffic. Behind them, Claire could hear shouting, boots pounding, the syndicate security teams converging on their position. Kate stayed at the rear with 2 others, setting up a defensive position to slow the pursuit. Claire heard the crack of warning shots, heard Kate's voice over the radio saying they were pinned down. Gabriel kept the main group moving, trusting Kate to handle herself. They reached the loading dock and found their vehicles waiting. Sophie was behind the wheel of the lead truck, engine running. They started loading girls into the vehicles as fast as they could, packing them in tight, making sure everyone was accounted for. A syndicate security team appeared at the far end of the loading dock, 6 enforcers in full armor. They raised their weapons and ordered everyone to stop and get on the ground. For a moment, everything froze. Then something unexpected happened. One of the enforcers, a young man in his 20s, lowered his weapon. "I am not doing this," he said. "I am not shooting kids." Another enforcer hesitated, then did the same. Then another. The lead enforcer, an older woman, looked at her team in disbelief. "What are you doing?" "They are criminals." "They are rescuing children from being sold," the young enforcer said. "We are supposed to be security. When did we become slavers?" The lead enforcer's face twisted, but she was outnumbered now. She lowered her weapon and stepped aside. "Go," she said to Gabriel. "Go before someone less conflicted arrives." Gabriel nodded to her, and they finished loading the vehicles. Kate and her team came running from the building, one of them bleeding from a shallow cut but otherwise okay. They piled into the last truck and the convoy pulled out, leaving the auction house behind. They did not go back to the farms. The plan was to scatter, to split the girls among multiple safe locations across the colony where the syndicate would have trouble tracking them. As they drove through the city streets, Claire looked back and saw something remarkable. People were coming out of shops and homes, standing on sidewalks watching the convoy pass, and some of them were clapping. News traveled fast on Haven's Gate. Within an hour, everyone knew that the Lighthouse Collective had raided the auction house and freed 43 girls. Within 2 hours, the story was on every news feed and social network. Within 4 hours, protests began in the city center, people demanding an end to the auction system. Vernon Cross fled the planet that afternoon on a private shuttle, his authority shattered, his carefully built empire crumbling. Victoria Hayes was recalled by the syndicate leadership and reassigned to another colony. The local government, sensing which way the wind was blowing, announced an emergency review of the auction system and a return to colonial charter law. It was not total victory. The syndicate still existed. There were still colonies where the auctions continued. But on Haven's Gate, on this one planet, the light had won. 6 months later, Claire stood on the steps of the new Colonial Assembly building, the one built on the ruins of the old syndicate headquarters. She wore simple clothes and carried no title, but when she spoke, people listened. She had been asked to present the Freedom Accord, a comprehensive set of laws that would protect every citizen's fundamental rights and outlaw all forms of human trafficking. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from across Haven's Gate, farmers and teachers and doctors and mechanics, regular people who had decided they wanted a voice in how their world was run. Claire had helped draft the accord with legal scholars and human rights experts, working late into the night for months to get every word right. She spoke for 20 minutes, outlining the key provisions, explaining why each one mattered. She talked about dignity and choice and the basic truth that people were not property and could never be property again. When she finished, the assembly voted unanimously to adopt the accord. Afterward, Gabriel found her on the steps outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. He put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there together in comfortable silence. "You do not need me anymore," Gabriel said finally, and there was pride in his voice, but also sadness. "You have become who you were always meant to be." Claire turned to look at him. "I will always need you. You are my father." The word still felt special every time she said it. Father. It meant protection and trust and unconditional love. It meant having someone in your corner no matter what. "Lily would have been proud of you," Gabriel said. "Helen too. I hope so. But I am not doing this for them. I am doing it for all the daughters who come after me, so they never have to stand on an auction block, so they never have to wonder if they are worth more than the credits someone will pay, so they can grow up knowing they are valuable just because they exist." Gabriel squeezed her shoulder. "Then let us make sure they know it." In the city below, lights were coming on as evening fell. Children played in streets that had been silent for generations. Families sat down to dinner together. Girls went to school and learned and dreamed about futures that belonged to them. The darkness had not been defeated everywhere. Claire knew that. The syndicate still controlled dozens of colonies. There were still auctions happening on other worlds. There was still work to do, still battles to fight. But here on Haven's Gate a light had been kindled, and Claire Stone, daughter of Gabriel Stone, survivor of the auctions and architect of the Freedom Accord, made a promise to herself and to every girl on every world who still lived in darkness.